The era of De-Americanization, How ASEAN and the Global South Are Relegating the United States to the Sidelines by Azlan Adnan. For decades, the United States was the undisputed hegemon in both global trade and security architecture. Its economic might and military reach dictated terms, shaped institutions, and influenced domestic policy in regions as far-flung as Southeast Asia, Latin America, and sub-Saharan Africa. Today, that primacy is eroding. Not gradually, but decisively. Across the ASEAN region and much of the global south, the United States has become increasingly irrelevant in economic partnerships and regional security discourse. A growing number of countries have shifted their attention to emerging poles of power: China, India, the Gulf states, Russia, the EU, and regional blocs such as BRICS and the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA. The American century, once proclaimed as eternal, is drawing to a close, and the global south is the architect of its undoing. The trade realignment from Washington to Beijing and beyond. The ASEAN bloc, comprising 10 Southeast Asian nations, has undergone a fundamental reorientation in its trade relationships. As of 2024, China is the largest trading partner for all ASEAN members, eclipsing the United States by margins too wide to ignore. For instance, Malaysia's trade with China exceeded $487 billion in 2023, more than triple its trade with the U.S. Vietnam, once courted as America's manufacturing substitute for China in the early 2020s, now ships more goods to Beijing than to Washington. The pattern is replicated across the global south. Brazil's soybean exports are tied to Chinese demand. Kenya and Ethiopia import more technology and machinery from China than from any Western source. Gulf nations like the UAE and Saudi Arabia are de-dollarizing oil contracts, increasingly settling trade in yuan, rupees, and dirhams. The U.S. has compounded its own marginalization with a suite of protectionist policies, including the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, and punitive tariffs on Asian and Global South goods. Rather than contain China, these measures have pushed American allies and non-aligned states into closer trade partnerships with Beijing, not because of ideological alignment, but due to pragmatic economics. The Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, the world's largest free trade agreement, includes all ASEAN states, China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand, but not the United States. Washington, by excluding itself, has excluded its influence. Industrial policy and the end of dependency. The Global South's growing economic confidence is underpinned by an assertive wave of industrial policy. Countries like Indonesia and Brazil are no longer content to be raw material exporters. President Jokowi's ban on nickel ore exports was a calculated move to attract investment in local refining and battery manufacturing. The result? A flood of Chinese, South Korean, and European investment into the Indonesian EV sector, with no meaningful American presence. In Africa, Nigeria's Dangote refinery and South Africa's localization drive are emblematic of a broader trend: the refusal to remain as peripheral suppliers to the industrial West. Instead, global South nations are choosing to climb the value chain and finding willing partners in the East. Chinese tech giants, Indian pharmaceuticals, Turkish defense companies, and Gulf sovereign funds are more aligned with the aspirations of these nations than U.S. firms, which remain bogged down by restrictive legislation and geopolitical baggage. Washington's offer, too often, is still the old one: conditional assistance, investor-state dispute settlement clauses, and opaque military aid, instead of joint ventures, technology transfers, and capacity building. The Global South is no longer buying. 3. Military power without influence. The myth of U.S. security guarantees. Militarily, the U.S. retains unmatched power projection capabilities: aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines, hundreds of overseas bases. Yet this dominance is now strategically impotent. In Southeast Asia, few nations view the U.S. as a reliable security partner. The Philippines under Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has flirted with closer U.S. military cooperation, but even that comes with domestic backlash and strategic hedging. Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Thailand, meanwhile, have refused to take sides, pursuing military modernization on their own terms while deepening ties with China and Russia. In Africa, the recent wave of military coups in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso was accompanied by the expulsion of French and American forces. Russia's Wagner Group, Turkey's defense industries, and China's peacekeeping units have filled the vacuum. In Latin America, countries such as Bolivia, Nicaragua, and even Mexico increasingly sideline the U.S. in regional security discussions, viewing Washington more as a destabilizer than a guarantor of peace. Unlike during the Cold War, today's multipolar world offers alternatives. Military technology and training are available from non-Western sources. Surveillance and cyber capabilities are no longer monopolized by the NSA or CIA. The U.S. security architecture is simply not essential, and increasingly, not wanted. Nasher Ivy. Soft power decay, the waning appeal of the American model. America's ideological pull, once so irresistible during the age of jazz, Hollywood, and Silicon Valley, is in decline. Across the global South, the model of liberal capitalism and Western-style democracy is viewed with skepticism, even disdain. The U.S. no longer appears as a beacon, but as a cautionary tale, polarized, dysfunctional, and hypocritical. The global South is tired of lectures on human rights that ignore Gaza. It rejects press freedom rhetoric from a country that hounds Julian Assange. It watches in disbelief as American presidential candidates embrace conspiracy theories, while its courts strip away reproductive rights. Rather than inspire, America now repels. This has profound implications for diplomatic influence. U.S. embassies and cultural outposts struggle to shape narratives in countries where China builds infrastructure. Russia trains troops, and the UAE funds universities. The prestige once attached to American degrees, passports, and platforms is no longer universal. In much of ASEAN and the global South, it is now the Chinese language institutes, Turkish TV series, and Qatari media that dominate hearts and minds. The technological displacement. Losing the commanding heights. The era in which American companies dictated global tech standards is fading. Huawei, Alibaba, TikTok, and Tencent have built parallel ecosystems to Silicon Valley. In many ASEAN countries, Chinese apps dominate mobile payments and digital commerce. India's Aadhaar system has inspired public digital infrastructure across the global South, from Kenya's Huduma Namba to Indonesia's eKTP. The U.S. response, bans, sanctions, and export controls, has only emboldened the search for autonomy. Even in space, America faces new competition. Nigeria and Brazil have launched satellites with Chinese and Russian help. The UAE's Mars mission and India's Chandrayaan moon landings show that technological prowess is no longer the preserve of NASA. The Pentagon may still run the world's most powerful satellites, but it is Chinese Beidou navigation and Russian GLONASS that guide fleets in Africa and Southeast Asia. America's once insurmountable tech edge is now fragmented, and the world is no longer waiting for U.S. approval. Bye. The diplomatic endgame, from global policeman to peripheral actor. At the G20, BRICS+, ASEAN summits, and the UN General Assembly, the language has changed. There is more talk of multipolarity, non-alignment, and strategic autonomy. These are not rhetorical flourishes. They reflect a shared desire to chart independent futures, that's back free of American diktat. ASEAN's preference for consensus and neutrality sits uneasily with U.S. demands for bloc confrontation with China. African nations demand debt restructuring on fair terms, not IMF conditionalities. Latin American leaders champion regional integration and reject U.S. meddling. In South Asia, even traditional allies like Bangladesh and Nepal have quietly deepened relations with Beijing, while maintaining warm ties with India and Russia. This is the diplomatic reality. The U.S. is not being attacked. It is being ignored. That is a far more damning indictment of its standing in the world. Conclusion. The age of strategic irrelevance. The United States is still a superpower, but not for the global South. Its economic footprint is shrinking. Its military presence is distrusted. Its cultural appeal is fading, and its diplomatic clout is ineffective. In the global South, particularly within ASEAN, Washington no longer sets the agenda. It is neither feared nor emulated. It is, in many respects, irrelevant. The world is not yet post-American, but it is rapidly becoming post-hegemonic. The nations of the global South are no longer passive recipients of Western order. They are building alternatives, shaping norms, and choosing partners that reflect their interests, not their subservience. America may still loom large in its own narrative, but in the strategic calculus of the global South, it is increasingly peripheral. And that, more than any overt hostility, signals the true end of U.S. primacy. A heartfelt light. To every soul whose hand did give, you've helped me dream, helped me live. In darkest hours your light came through, with hearts so kind, so pure, so true. Your gifts, like stars in deepest night, have steered me gently toward the light. Each coin, each word, each silent prayer, a thread of hope, so rich, so rare. My eyes once dimmed now seek the skies, and slowly, clearer visions rise. Because of you, I dare to see the world again. Its grace, its plea. Your compassion's flame will not just stay with me alone. It lights the way for others wandering through despair to feel the warmth of selfless care. You've shown what love in action means, in quiet ways through giving scenes. You've built a bridge from soul to soul and made the broken feel more whole. So let this thanks rise like a song, a melody both soft and strong. May your example gently call more hearts to rise to give. To fall into the joy of lifting pain, of planting hope where none remains. Your kindness walks beside me still, a light, a love, a living will.
Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to show your support.